Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Final Say Radio Show with your host, Brett Rappaport. Joining me is Jon Rappaport today, my wonderful co-host.
And Big Brother.
We are live here at the Hank Greenspun School of Journalism and Media Studies, KUNV, at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. By the way, I saw a great commercial by Greg Anthony, who was one of the great basketball players from the run that UNLV had years ago, where they won, it was over 30 games in a row. They were a great team with Larry Johnson and Stacey Augmon and a couple others.
And he moved from basketball to political commercials.
Well, that's right. No, it was good to see. Good to see.
Who was he supporting?
Mitt Romney.
Oh.
He actually endorsed Mitt Romney.
Is that who he endorsed last time?
No, I don't think so.
No, he did not.
No, he didn't. That's right.
It's a little.
It's very interesting because New Jersey is not a swing state. In fact, it's a very blue state. North Carolina has historically probably been a red state and is a little borderline. Will probably be a red state this year. But being here in Nevada, we've seen quite a bit of political commercials of both parties really going at it, and the fight's pretty nasty. Pretty entertaining, actually. Some of them have been quite humorous.
It is. It's a wake-up call. But I'm glad you mentioned that advertisement, because it's really indicative of what we wanted to discuss during this session. So this week we heard the second of 3 presidential debates. We heard 1 vice presidential debate. And at the end of the day, this is really a decision, a very critical decision, this quadrennial debate that we have as to who's going to sit in the big chair in the biggest house in the most important country in the world. And that's a monumental task. I mean, we know it's monumental because there's not a man who enters there who doesn't look 15 years older when he leaves, right? So
right.
Irrespective of whether we like the guy holding office, that they all really have to put in a lot of effort, and it's not an easy job. But this is not about personalities. It's about performance. And what we wanted to discuss in this particular segment is we really want to do an analysis and look at the performance. We've had 4 years of President Obama, and there's a record there. And so when we look at the debates, what they're really debating is, or should be debating, is what one person said they were going to do and was able to achieve in 4 years versus what another person says they're going to do, and then reflect that against their history of success or failures to try to come to a determination. What are you going to do with your vote?
Well, that's absolutely right, John. And I want to go a little step backward in time and look at candidate Obama.
Is this going to involve a soliloquy?
No.
Okay.
But what we had a gentleman who was running for the office of presidency, challenging Hillary Clinton, who at the time was the favorite to beat whoever the Republican challenger was, to be quite honest. And he offered this message of hope and change. He sold the American people. He lit a fire. He grew this movement of people who enjoyed listening to what he had to say. And he did say things that people needed to hear at the time. So now we are 4 years later, and as you've stated, John, we do have the record. So before we get into this record, I want to offer a little comment about the Republican challenger, Governor Mitt Romney. He has a completely different type of a record than that of Barack Obama because he has spent almost his entire career in the private sector. He has been very involved in charity with his church for many years. He's donated in excess of $50 million. He's certainly paid an awful lot of money in taxes throughout his lifetime. And yes, when he was employed, he was paying a very high rate of taxation. He has created many jobs, and he has actually created wealth for many other people, including pensions of, say, teachers' unions out in California or teachers' unions all across this nation who have invested in Bain Capital or many other companies that were associated with this, the investment companies that Mitt Romney had worked for or started or created, because he's a creator. Then we see his Olympic experience. We had an Olympics that was almost about to implode and possibly not even go off. and he stepped right in and ended up actually making money on that Olympics. It was an incredibly successful Olympics. And by the way, when he went over to Britain during this past Olympics, and he made they got in the little words, they were upset with him because they thought he had insulted them. Well, the British did not make a profit. In fact, they had lost money on this Olympics.
How did Greece do? Greece is dying as a nation because they way overspent. The concept of Greece running an Olympics, and I just digress a little bit, the concept of the people who brought us the Olympics having an Olympics, especially an anniversary Olympics, was really cool. However, the country is too small, the GDP could not handle it, and the country is still suffering heavily, and that's only a small part of it. Their socialist mentality, of course, has a lot to do with it. But to your point, he proved that he could not only run and create complex businesses, take broken businesses and repair them, right? Because what happens when a business fails, one of two things happens. It either goes completely bankrupt, belly up, and nobody gets anything out of it, and people just do a lot of write-downs on their taxes, or they reconstruct it, they sell off pieces, they lay people off, they do whatever it takes. But almost every company has gone through this. Some of the greatest companies that have ever existed, whether you want to talk about IBM, GE, etc., all of these large companies historically have laid off hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. But what they do is they go through cycles. When they go through a corrective cycle, they cut dead weight, they make course corrections, they cycle down, and then they usually emerge stronger, leaner, meaner, and then they proceed to grow. That's the history of how these things happen. Business knows how to do this. The bankruptcy courts know how to do this. Presidents, as a general rule, who come to office as community organizers don't have the talent, the skill, the wherewithal, the history to do this, and we've seen, unfortunately, the result of that.
Well, that's right. And so I want to compare just two individuals real quickly, and then we're going to break into our discussion here on economic issues, jobs, the economy, actual results, things that we feel are necessary to change the course that we're on right now. Mitt Romney, and I've seen him speak numerous times over the past few years, there's nothing in his record that you could look at, unlike other politicians throughout these campaigns for decades and decades, where you could say, well, he did this shady deal, he did this and this, he's got skeletons in the closets. Well, guess what? They've looked, they're not there. You're talking about a man who has dedicated his life to people, to his family, to his country, to his fellow brothers and sisters in the state of Massachusetts, or wherever else he's lived and worked throughout his career. A man who's been incredibly generous and sharing and kind, a man who, from what we understand, has never even smoked, drank, or have done many things that, well, our last two presidents we know have experimented in drugs. One of them was very clearly in his book, wrote numerous times about the lines of cocaine and the pot and all the other stuff. So personally, I don't see how you compare the content of the character of these two individuals as far as their behavior publicly, at least.
Right.
Now, I do want to say this. I'm not knocking the president at all with regards to how he handles himself with his family. His relationship with his wife and his children seem to be a wonderful family. Unlike I've seen people just ridicule the children of past presidents or politicians. It's completely unfair, completely unwarranted, and absolutely unnecessary for that matter. That being said, I'd like to read the preamble of our Constitution, and that is our nation, the United States of America, for those who need to be reminded. Now, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty and prosperity, liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. Now, I'm going to hold up this document, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very small book, and there's not that much to it. The full size is roughly 20-odd pages. Now, It establishes our form of government, our basic guidelines for how we elect our leaders. It establishes an extremely well-balanced, perfectly balanced form of government between the executive, the judicial, and a legislative branch. And it breaks it down to what our rights are. And then they add, throughout the years, well, first with the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, religion, our Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, the right to not have military just walk into our homes and take quarters. And then you get to the most important part, the 9th and 10th Amendment, which deal with states' rights. That which the federal government does not have to do is left up to the states. And what we have seen over many years are changes to our government where we've taken the rights away from the individual and the states and have moved them to a federal system. And we've worked on the premise that one size shoe in Washington, D.C. will fit all Americans. And it is simply not the case, because let me tell you, if John walks into my closet and tries to put on one of my shirts, it's going to look pretty big on him. If I try to wear one of his shirts, I might feel a little crunched. It just doesn't work. And we're not even that different in size. But just imagine from American to American. So if you think that every single policy created by politicians in Washington, D.C., most of which are lawyers with extremely very little business experience.
Well, let's look at two very important things. So the reason you brought up the Constitution, Brett, is because when we're about to break down into a variety of issues that we deem important to the average American, right? Some domestic issues, some world issues. And as we go through these, we want to be able to take some metrics. Now, clearly we're espousing our opinion here, but the metrics really aren't just what's inside of the brothers Rapp's heads. The metrics are in this book, the second good book, right? And the beauty of this book, by the way, is look how petite it is. It's tiny. It's very small, unlike Obamacare, but we'll get there. But the two of the very important things about the Constitution, one, as you pointed out about states' rights, is the Constitution is about restrictions on the government, not so much about restrictions on the people. It's about restricting government power over the individual, okay? It's also about restricting the federal powers over the state. And as you pointed out, our wardrobe differential, look, I left North Carolina to come here to do the radio program in Las Vegas. North Carolina and Las Vegas couldn't be any more different in terms of states' needs. We have lush mountains. They're starving for water. We have entirely different economies, right? We have banking, and we have furniture, and we have pig farms and high tech and different things, right? They have casinos, and they have tourism, and they have miscellaneous. I mean, every state is different, and each state should have the right to elect their officials. In fact, they do have the right. It's right in this book to hire, and those officials can then serve the interests of those people. And I know you wanted to head into this because one of the big things that we have to look at when we weigh the issues are, does that president or has that person who's running for office shown respect for the Constitution? My personal opinion is, even if some of the results of some of their policies have proved beneficial in some way, if it's not in keeping with the Constitution, if it would make our founding fathers roll over in the proverbial grave, then I don't think they're fit to hold that chair.
Right. And, a thought is that President Barack Obama was a constitutional professor, so they say, and he was an attorney.
For as much as much as somebody who spent his life around growing up around Marxists could hold a reasonable opinion.
What's interesting about this is, for somebody who made a statement in the debate yesterday evening that he was raised by a single mom, which, yes, during part of his childhood, that is true. She was married twice. I mean, there was a father there throughout part of this process. And, he talks about the not being privileged at all. He went to very exclusive private schools in Hawaii, which were favors done to the family. Right. So, there isn't that much difference between him and Mitt Romney for the path they've had through their schooling and things of that nature is what I'm making the point. Now, here's where they separate, though. People who have the opportunity to go to such exclusive schools and, in fact, go to Harvard to get a law degree and then no longer have their law degree, well, that's questionable to me. If I worked so hard to accomplish something like that, I would not let it go.
Right.
I mean, I would be proud of that, John. And also, if I was representing the United States and taking that oath to the Constitution, I would certainly be questioning my own self. I'm taking this oath, but I don't have my. There's something very weird.
Well, sadly, we come from a family that pays careful attention to politics, and I would say that all the way up to one of the people held in the highest regard in this area, Ronald Reagan, I don't think any of them have shown nearly the respect for the Constitution they should. However, I think what we've seen is a slippery slope, including Bush, way downhill in terms of respect for the Constitution, and I think we've hit about rock bottom.
What we've seen since Reagan is a roller coaster within all of these administrations. There's been good and bad throughout George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, George Bush Jr., and now Barack Obama. We have seen abuse of constitutional rights, of state rights, and, in fact, of the individual liberties and freedoms of the American people throughout all of these. However, I have never in a 4-year period since going back to FDR's administration, which, by the way, there were over 2,000 court cases overturned against that administration for their violations of law and Constitution, by the way. So as much as we love Franklin Delano Roosevelt, there were a lot of legal issues. But since that administration, this administration takes the cake. So I'm going to now go into our economic discussion, John.
Excellent. Can I make one quick statement on this? Another thing I want to point out, by the way, I'm holding in my hands the Heritage Foundation's version of a Constitution. So there's no reason. I know most people actually don't have the most important document, the Constitution, in their home, sadly enough. But there's a lot of great organizations where you can get these free. But one of the things I want to point out in this document is you talked about laws. One of the most profound things, and despite conservative, liberal, Republican, Democratic, Delta, my big issue is because I'm perfectly fine with losing elections and having very respectful, high-quality people who don't happen to agree with me politically, as long as they're coming in with ethics, respect for the Constitution, and respect for law. But specifically, this document was designed to a large measure because we left the world of kings. We're seeing all over the world what happens. Another word for king is dictator, right? Another word for communism is dictator by party rule, right? All of which has been horrific for people. This United States experiment is about the fact that we're a nation of laws, not of men. And when we have a man in office or a woman who tramples the law and pushes their agenda above and beyond the law, then, in my opinion, they're complicitous in the destruction of this great nation and the Constitution. With that, Brett, I know you've done some great research. Have at it.
Well, John, and in my hand, I have to say, is my Constitution from the American Civil Rights Union and the Susan Carlson Center. And Susan Carlson, a very good friend of ours, was so kind and generous to literally hand me about 100 copies of the Constitutions to just hand out to people as I go to meetings throughout different organizations and things that I visit in my travels. And that's what I do. And then when I run out, I go back to another organization. I pick up a handful more because this should be in the hands of every American.